If you're in midlife and you're not satisfied with your life, you're in one of 7 stages of what we mistakenly call a crisis. And in this video, we're figuring out what comes next for you. Stage 3 is very dangerous. It's where a lot of us collapse, but it's also where the breakthrough happens. I hit stage 3 at 37. I was 90 pounds overweight, my career was wasted, and marriage crumbling. But oh boy, I wish I knew back then what stage 4 would bring. By the end of this video, you'll learn where you are right now and what's coming next, and most importantly, how to be prepared for that wonderful transformation that is coming your way. It all starts with stage 1. I remember the exact moment stage 1 hit me. I was 37 years old, I was standing in front of the mirror and I didn't recognize the person staring back. My friends were getting married, raising kids, building companies, looking fit and stable. I felt frozen while everybody around me seemingly moving forward. I had a business, but I could feel it slipping away. I just switched careers, believing I was building a new future. But then I noticed that my entire field was being automated. All that work to reinvent myself, about to be wiped out by AI in a year or two. That fear became a belief. My entire life was heading towards a dead end. And that's when the panic attacks started. Here's what was really happening and why your brain is wired to panic at this exact moment. So stage 1 begins when you realize viscerally that time is no longer infinite. It's measurable, it's definable, and it's running out. You can feel it in the chronic back pain. 20 years ago, you could party all night and feel fantastic the next day. Now, the wintertime switch feels like a catastrophe. And in 1965, this psychoanalyst Elliot Jacques called this midlife crisis a confrontation with mortality that triggers deep re-evaluation of choices, values, and identity. Emotional well-being hits its lowest point around midlife because we compare our current reality against the expectations we formed 20 years ago. And that gap between where we are and where we thought would be, we basically consider it as a failure. Then you do the mental math. In 20 years, I'll be 60. Guess the dominant reaction? It's panic, because our brain associates loss of time with loss of possibility, with potential wasted. And we can't go back in time to try something different. That's exactly where I was. Not only did I start to regret my choices from 20 years ago, but I also start to worry too much about my next choices. What do I do now with my entire life? What if I screw this up again? And I only have one last attempt, one last 20 years of productive life. And then that's it, my 60s. Overthinking amplified everything. I started sleeping poorly, then not sleeping at all. I felt old, irrelevant, behind everyone. And because I didn't know how to deal with that emotional pressure, I became obsessed with chasing youth. I did everything I could to feel young again, which is how I transitioned straight into stage 2. Without even realizing it, chasing youth as your life depends on it. Stage 2 hit me like a freight train. I became obsessed with reversing time. I broke up with my wife. I went to the gym every single day, not out of discipline, but out of panic that if I skipped even once, death would eventually catch me. When my gym, that was YMCA by the way, was closed on Sundays, I went there anyway and did push-ups on the sidewalk because I simply couldn't tolerate the feeling of slowing down. I tracked every calorie, every biomarker, every variable in my body. I went skydiving. In 6 months, I dated 5 girlfriends, including one who was 12 years younger. That didn't go well. I quit working for a year, burned through my savings like I'd never needed money again, and convinced myself that since life was halfway over, everything had to be experienced right now. Here's what was really happening. So studies shows that when your subconscious detects emotional threat, like feeling irrelevant, aging, or losing identity, it activates the same reward circuits associated with impulsive behavior and dopamine-driven urgency. This is why midlife often triggers sudden compulsive decisions like drastic relationship changes, career abandonment, Spending sprees, obsession with appearance, extreme fitness routines, cosmetic procedures, chasing validation through new partners. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert explains that during uncertainty, we confuse movement with progress. Instead of questioning the story inside our mind, we attempt to rearrange the world outside of us. And the logic goes, if I can change the externals fast enough, I won't have to feel what's happening internally. And it feels good to get that red sports car. It surely does, but for a week. In reality, this stage isn't about excitement, it's about escape. And yes, some parts felt positive. I lost 90 pounds, traveled to Alaska, Istanbul, all across the States. I checked off half of my bucket list. But looking back, I can see that none of those actions came from peace, they came from fear. Neuroscience research from UCLA shows that impulsive actions temporarily suppress the emotional centers of the brain, meaning every drastic move, new relationships, new hobby, new purchase, becomes a way to outrun these uncomfortable emotions. But the problem with escaping your inner world is this: everywhere you run, you take yourself with you. After the adrenaline of distraction wore off, the same questions remained. But now I felt even worse, because I tried everything and had fewer and fewer things to try, none of which actually helped. And that realization that no amount of external change could fix the internal collapse pushed me straight into the stage 3. The stage where everything falls apart, when everything you tried doesn't help. After a year of chasing youth, burning through my savings and crossing off half of my bucket list, I felt even worse, both inside and of course outside. My savings were gone, my body was exhausted, and not a single relationship I had brought real connection. I started remembering my wife, realizing I still love her, and that's when stage 3 hit. I stopped going to the gym. I started eating pancakes with syrup every morning. I stopped caring about anything. I spent entire days lying in bed, not answering messages, not talking to anyone. If the previous year was about proving something to the world, this time was about hiding from the world. I was ashamed of the facade I'd built, ashamed that I couldn't keep up the persona, ashamed that underneath all of the improvements, I still felt empty. Here's what was really happening and why our brains shut down when nothing works anymore. Psychologists call this the depressive collapse, and neurologically it makes sense. After prolonged adrenaline-driven behavior, dopamine spikes from novelty, new relationships, achievements, intense routines, our nervous system crashed into exhaustion. Our brains shift from the dopamine system, seeking rewards, to the pain system, avoiding threat. The bucket list gets crossed off, the weight is lost, the relationship carousel stops spinning, and suddenly there's silence. And in that silence, the truth arrives. There is nothing we can do externally to fix the internal emptiness. Research from the Journal of Affective Disorders shows that when we perceive loss of future, the sense that the best years are behind us, it activates the same neural pathways as grief. At this point, the crisis stops being about the fear of aging and becomes about the fear of meaningless. Depression here isn't just laziness, it's a nervous system collapse after our ego exhausts every other strategy. And depression appears where every attempt to control your life externally has failed to change how you feel internally. The old identity, the one that was built on achievement, status, youth, or validation, no longer works, and our subconscious refuses to continue the performance. This stage feels like death, because psychologically it is. The false self is dying, our ego is dying, and that's where stage 4 begins, the moment we're finally forced to look inward, because when everything external stops working, something unexpected happens. We are forced to start asking different questions. I was lying in bed, depressed as usual, doom scrolling Instagram, and then this fragment appeared. An interview with David Lynch, one of my filmmaking heroes. The guy who made this Eraserhead and Twin Peaks, those bizarre works that somehow got funded. Impossible to think that that could happen now in the age of Marvel. I'd always wanted to become a director like him, but I never knew him as a spiritual guy. And in this interview, he was talking about meditation. He said he'd achieved his external dream of becoming a director, shooting a large film with a big crew and a camera and film and lights, but he still felt miserable. That's when he realized happiness couldn't be found externally. And that's how he started meditating. And I was never a meditator. I was never a spiritual or religious guy. I'm an engineer, scientific thinking, logic driven. I used to laugh at spiritual stuff. I used to make fun of people who believed in God. But at the same time, well, I had nothing to lose, so I tried meditation. And for once in my life, I had this little glimpse of peace, this fleeting moment of stillness, this kind of warmth in my chest without any external reason. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. Same gray life, same overthinking, same life is over mood. What made it worse? I had a long airplane ride the next day, and I decided to stay up all night so I could sleep on the plane. But in the airplane, I couldn't sleep. I was crying without tears. This music, this special song, reminded me of my wife and that I abandoned her. And I felt so bad internally that I screamed out loud. I was very loud in the middle of a crowded airplane. I screamed, "God, if you're there, give me a sign." People gave me these awkward looks, but my life changed forever, because in 15 seconds, God showed up with a sign. In the airport, I had a conversation with a random guy, and during that conversation, I wasn't overthinking. I was just talking to him, and it felt like a therapeutic session. So I secretly wished to sit next to him so we can continue this conversation. And of course, we were sitting 10 rows apart. But when we climbed the altitude, right after I screamed, "God, give me a sign," a lady rushed to the toilet and fell down consciousness. She literally hit the deck. And they called a medical emergency, asking for a doctor on board. Luckily, they found a doctor. And the doctor said we had to lay her down. In the entire airplane, there's only one row with 2 empty seats, my row, because it was a non-recliner row. But I didn't care. I got the tickets. That's how depression works. You don't care. So they laid down her in my row and moved me to her seat. And yes, she was sitting right next to this guy I was secretly wished to sit next to. And we talked for the rest of this 6-hour flight. My skeptical mind, my engineering mind, would have brushed it off as a mere coincidence. Nothing strange, just dumb luck. But this time was different. I tried meditation and had this glimpse of inner peace. And then after that, I asked for a sign. And maybe it wasn't random coincidence. Maybe it was a sign, I thought. What if God was listening? Well, I had nothing to lose, so I went all in. It was wild for me, but I kept asking for signs. I kept looking closer, paying attention to small coincidences. I followed intuition rather than logic. So I dialed my curiosity up to 100%, and it changed my life. After months of this fascinating journey, full of synchronicities, full of small miracles and coincidences, I found my purpose in life. I met my higher self, and I fell in love with myself again. Even wrote a book about all of that, about my journey. And this book was published by a New York-based book publisher. Here's what's really happening. Those signs, they were always there. It's just our reticular activating system. It's that subconscious mechanism to put our attention to something. It starts to put our attention to where we're supposed to put our attention at the moment. And when we have nothing to lose, we can actually follow those signs. It only happens after the meditation. It only happens when we quiet this analytical mind through meditation. And we let the intuitive mind to speak. And that's exactly what happened to me on that airplane. That was my moment of spiritual awakening. And awakening isn't the end of the journey, it's the beginning. Because once you see the truth, you have to decide what to do with it. And that's where stage 5 begins. The stage where you rebuild yourself from the inside out. Stage 5 is the quiet turn inward. The place where we begin to notice patterns with a softer gaze, where the question we ask ourselves got better, and when the practices we take are less about fixing the world around us and more about making our inner life coherent enough that the outside finally makes sense. And solitude stops being an escape. In this phase, it slowly becomes a doorway that we walk on purpose. After the awakening, I followed signs, synchronicities. They arrived in clusters, and my analytical mind was trying to map them, but my intuition simply pointed towards the next turn. The count of those coincidences rose past 100, then past 800. And that's when engineer in me took over, and I started logging them daily. And that diary turned into a manuscript. That manuscript turned into a book that was published. And then a deeper question surfaced. What exactly happened right now? What exactly happened to me? What am I supposed to do with all that? So I went on a quest, and I rebuilt my routines with intention. Not as a performance, but as a way of finding the truth again. So I returned to the gym, but this time I was a lazy gymmer. I was doing 30 minutes of rowing every single day, and that's it. I sat in a sauna to remove the toxins, and I shocked my system awake with the cold plunge. And I immersed in the reading. I was reading. 4 books a month. It was Eckhart Tolle, Conversation with God, Hermetic teachings, even my old notes from the college on quantum physics. Then Carl Jung, of course, Nietzsche, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Marcus Aurelius, Stoics, reading roughly 4 books a month. And along the way, I practiced meditation. I started to manifest. I started to try that. I started this visualization exercises. Careful attention to my inner dialogue, journaling, habit tracking, and gratitude logs. I wasn't chasing youth anymore. I was very clearly chasing the truth. But more interesting realization is that self-help didn't work for me. What did begin to work gently and consistently was less dramatic and more human. Sitting in meditation long enough for the mind to unclench. It's bringing the awareness to the present moment without bargaining, and practice acceptance. Acceptance of who I was right then, including the parts I would have preferred to edit out. So after a year, I finally accepted who I was without trying to fix myself. On the days that I felt like a failure, I let me be failure that day. I let that be true for that day. The moment I stopped trying to fix myself, the surprising amount of energy came back. And I utilized that energy simply to do the next right piece of work in front of me. I made 2 calls I had avoided for weeks because I was trying to fix myself. I sent that ugly draft without polishing it to perfection because I realized perfection. I didn't work out without me trying to turn it into a spreadsheet or a scoreboard. It became less about optimizing myself and more about showing up as myself as is without forcing the outcomes, and more about moving with persistence, so to say. And step by step, life felt coherent again. So after a year of doing this inner work, I realized that there is no such thing as an answer to the question, who am I? And in order to answer that question, we have to ask that question every single morning. And then we get to decide who we wanted to be on that given day, and then become that version of ourselves. And that's the answer to the question, who am I? And that's how we transition to stage 6. So stage 6 is when the inner shift shows up in a daily life. Your decisions felt lighter, and actions flow without forcing. You're not trying to be positive anymore. Positivity becomes the side effect of alignment. What should I do? Fades, because that answer is not relevant anymore, and action starts coming from your higher self, from your purpose. You wake up knowing what matters and what doesn't. The noise of this comparison, this ego disappears. Life starts to cooperate, opportunities appear. And you know what? That's all a lie. There's no such thing as living in alignment. The truth is, your life still contains all of that familiar challenges. Bills arrive like clockwork. Work demands your energy. Traffic still tests your patience. Arguments with your spouse still happen. And procrastination remains an occasional companion. But something fundamental has already shifted. You stopped expecting self-help techniques to eliminate these realities. And instead, you've discovered the quiet power of acceptance. Meditation hasn't removed your problems, it simply helped you recognize that internal narrative was creating much of your suffering. You learned small ways to navigate your resistance, not to achieve perfection, but to accomplish what matters. And most importantly, your motivation has transformed. Your actions are no longer driven by self-improvement, but by contribution, caring for loved ones, creating value for others, and using your unique gifts in service to something beyond yourself. And this shift from self-focus to contribution brings a profound sense of authenticity. You stop performing for approval and started living from your core, accepting yourself completely while directing your energy toward what truly matters. This is purpose in the most genuine form. So this is the stage 6 revelation. Your midlife crisis wasn't meant to destroy you. It was dismantling the inauthentic self, teaching you to embrace who you truly are, and it teaches you radical self-acceptance. You accept yourself as is without trying to fix that person anymore, even when that person fails to meet your former standards or other expectations. Here you go, guys. 6 stages so you could spot where you are right now and what comes next. If any of those stages resonated with you today, I'd love to hear with you in the comments below. And please remember, guys, wherever you are on this path, you don't have to walk it alone. You're welcome in our free Midlife Wisdom community, where we share experience, tools, and support for this fascinating journey of transformation. If this video helped, your likes and subscriptions tell me to make more videos like this one. Thank you for doing the work. And please check out the next video, 6 decisions that define your midlife crisis outcome. It's the clear cheat sheet for navigating this midlife crisis. I'll see you all there.